Somebody tried to do a remake of James Brown. This is a man's world, boy, did they fuck it up. Jeez. WHGE 95.3 FM coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling.
Hey,
We do
share.
so because it changes the pressure on people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host and third eye optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open. And as we always do, let's start here. Every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And indeed, that's what we do here on the Open Eye. Because we're not here for comfort, we're here for truth. Because somewhere along the line, America stopped being a promise and became a performance. Okay? And it's a performance where politicians rehearse concern but deliver nothing. A performance where the middle class is told to work harder while the ladder keeps getting pulled higher. A performance where history is rewritten, reality is distorted, and justice is always coming soon. And it never gets here. Let me be clear. This didn't just happen overnight. Let me slow down. This is a result of decisions, deliberate decisions to prioritize profit over people, decisions to protect power instead of distribute it, decisions to distract you with culture wars while economic warfare is waged against your very survival. You're told inflation is the problem, but not corporate greed. You're told crime is the problem, but not poverty. You're told to fear your neighbor, but never question the system. And while you busy arguing with each other, they busy consolidating everything, your labor, your time, your future. This is not dysfunction, this is design. So today we're going to pull back the curtain. We're going to connect the dots they told you not to connect. And we're going to say the quiet part out loud. Because here on the Open Eye, we don't deal in illusions. We deal in revelation. All right? Let me get my disclaimer out the way. All right, where we at here? Here, come on.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
WHGE 95.3 FM, Open Eye, hey Steve. All right, all right. Let's see, there was something, I dealt with this in the past. Of course, we got some new listeners, and I revised what I said about this. Not the truth about it, though. That's what I'm going to give you. And that's the 3/5 lie. Okay? Most people have been taught the 3/5 compromise like it was some strange moral calculation. Like the founders sat around debating how much of a human being a black person was worth. That's not what happened. All right? Let's tell the truth here. The 3/5 compromise was never about black humanity. It was about white power. When the Constitution was being drafted in 1787, the issue wasn't whether enslaved Africans were human. The issue was whether Southern slave states could use black bodies to increase their political power, while still denying those same people every right that comes with being human. And see, the South wanted to count enslaved black people fully in the population, not to freedom, not to recognize their dignity, but to inflate their numbers in Congress. And that was to gain more seats in the House of Representatives and more influence in presidential elections through the Electoral College. The North, of course, objected, not because they saw black people as equals, but because they didn't want the South gaining disproportionate control of the federal government. So what did they do? They compromised. Not on morality, not on justice. They compromised on how to distribute power among white men. And the result was this. Each enslaved black person would be counted as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of representation only, while remaining zero in terms of rights, citizenship, protection, or humanity. Let that sink in. Black people were counted when it benefited white political power, ignored when it came to human rights, exploited economically, and erased legally. That's not partial recognition. That's total exploitation wrapped in mathematical language. And here's where we need to get even more precise. The 3/5 compromise did not mean white America saw black people as 3/5 human. It meant white America saw black people as tools for increasing Southern representation, protecting the institution of slavery, and expanding a racial hierarchy built into the foundation of the nation. Northern elites, they all know, they weren't innocent either. Their opposition wasn't rooted in equality, it was rooted in political competition. They were arguing over who gets the benefit from black bodies, not whether black people deserve freedom. So when people soften this history, when they turn it into misunderstanding or a different time, they're lying by omission. There wasn't confusion. This was design. And if we're honest, truly honest, we have to ask, what has really changed? The 3/5 compromise may be going on paper, but the logic behind it still echoes. Communities heavily populated by black people still face political manipulation through gerrymandering. The prison system counts incarcerated individuals for representation, often in districts where black people can't vote, echoing that same old formula, counting bodies without granting power. Why do you think state prisons are usually built in some rural area with a low white population? The economic system still extract labor, culture, and influence from black communities while denying any equitable return. Different centuries, same blueprint. So no, black people were never 3/5 human. They were treated as fully exploitable, politically useful, while being denied recognition as human beings altogether. Not 3/5. Not one half, not one quarter, not one iota. Zero. Zero when it came to rights and humanity, 100% when it came to exploitation. And that's the truth of the compromise. And until we confront that truth, not the sanitized version, not the textbook version, we will keep misunderstanding the very foundation this country was built on. This is the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Well, I had interesting event at the UN this week on the 25th. The world did something it should have done a long goddamn time ago. The United Nations General Assembly voted 123-3 to recognize the enslavement of African people as the gravest crime against humanity. And to begin talking not just about memory, but about repair. Not symbolism, not empty apologies, repair. And that's where the room got quiet. Because when the conversation moves from we acknowledge to we owe, suddenly morality gets replaced with legal gymnastics. Let's be clear about about what this resolution actually proposes. A reparations framework, not forced, but encouraged. Voluntary contributions to rebuild nations that were deliberately hollowed out. Educational funds, infrastructure, economic repair. And something even more dangerous to the status quo, the return of stolen history. Artifacts, archives, cultural memory, taken, displayed, monetized, now being called back home. That's not radical. That's just restitution. But that word showed up, restitution. 3 nations hit the brakes. The United States is not real, and Argentina. 3 votes, 3 no's, and 3 very telling explanations. Let's start with the United States. Their argument: slavery wasn't illegal when it happened, so you can't apply law retroactively. Think about what was just said there. If something was legal when it was done, no matter how brutal, how inhumane, how monstrous, then today there is no obligation to repair the damage. That's not law. That's a loophole for atrocity. They call reparations a reallocation of resources to people distantly related to victims. Distantly related? We're talking about generational wealth gas, land theft, economic systems built on forced labor, and global disparities that didn't magically appear. They were engineered. You don't get the profit for centuries and then claim distance when the bill comes due. And then came the argument about hierarchy of suffering. That recognizing this is one of the gravest crimes somehow diminishes others. No. That's not protection of history. That's deflection from accountability. Now let's talk about Israel. It's not real. Their objection: calling the slave trade the gravest crime risks diminishing the uniqueness of the Holocaust. And here's the truth. Acknowledging one atrocity does not erase another. Pain is not a competition. Suffering is not a ranking system. They like to call the Holocaust in Germany the greatest Holocaust ever. It's the greatest Holocaust on film. The greatest Holocaust that is taught in Western education. And if your moral framework requires minimizing one horror to preserve another, then what you're protecting is not history, it's narrative control. Like I said, the greatest Holocaust on film. And you just think, it lasted, what, 6 years, 4 years? And then they only counted half of the people that Germany murdered, that the Nazis murdered. There was here about 6 million Jews. Actually, there were 12 million victims of Germany's Holocaust. And weren't just Jews, because there was black people there too. And then there's Argentina under Javier Milei. This one's about ideology. They call it global overreach. It's woke. It's a threat to sovereignty. Let's translate that. Any collective effort to address historical injustice is now labeled as an attack on independence. And don't forget who Argentina is. Because Argentina was one of those South American countries that purged its black population and was a safe space for the Nazi criminals of World War II. Still is. They got German communities there that look just like Nazi Germany. There's no vote. We're not responsible, and we refuse to even participate in the conversation. Where that button at? Fuck you, Argentina. Now here's what deserves your attention. It wasn't just the 3 no votes. It was the 52 absentee votes. The UK, Canada, the European Union, they didn't say no. They didn't say yes either. How come? Because saying yes might open the door to lawsuits, to financial claims, to returning what was taken. Britain, give it back. So they chose the oldest political move in the book. Silence dressed up as neutrality. Now let's not pretend this is complicated. The world agrees slavery was a crime, a catastrophic crime, and a crime that built empires. And when the conversation shifts to repair, suddenly the language changes. Well, legal precedent, non-retroactively, sovereignty, complexity. All this is just sophisticated ways of saying one thing. We acknowledge what happened, but we ain't paying for it. Now here's the truth. You cannot build wealth on stolen labor, stolen land, stolen bodies, and then hide behind legal timelines when justice comes knocking. History doesn't expire. Damage doesn't dissolve. And accountability doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. 123 nations said, we see it. And the rest, they looked at the bill and suddenly forgot how to read. You don't get distracted by the vote count. Pay attention to the reaction, because it tells you everything about how power responds when truth demands compensation. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This is The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs here on Open Eye. You know, one of the silly reasons that people come up with for voting for the orange disaster. And I've heard too many black people say this and smack them upside the head. Oh yeah, he's a great businessman. Yeah, he's a great businessman. He knew how to make a deal. And didn't he write a book or pay somebody to write a book about the art of the deal? That's what that crap was. Didn't have AI then. So when AI, he had some ghostwriter write that. And I would have charged him a hell of a lot of money to write that BS. Yeah. The myth of the master deal maker. Let's stop playing. Let's stop pretending. The mythology around Donald Trump as some kind of unstoppable business genius isn't just exaggerated, it's manufactured. And carefully branded, repeated until people stop questioning. I don't know who these people that weren't questioning it was, because sure as hell wasn't me. Because when you strip away the gold plating, the licensing deal, the television theatrics, what you left with is not a story of consistent success, but a pattern of collapse, bailout, rebranding, and failure. Let's take a look at it. He buys Trump Plaza. You ever seen Trump Plaza? One of the tackiest, low-class places. And he bought it for hundreds of millions of dollars. The bank owns it. And he bought a luxury yacht. The bank said, we don't need that. You owe us a lot of goddamn money. Now, he built multiple casinos. Businesses where the house is supposed to always win. The mob ran casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City for decades. From the 40s up through the 80s. They didn't bankrupt them. Even when Bugsy Siegel effed up the money. The flamingo that he built, even though he effed up the money, it was still profitable. That's where they killed him. That's where the house is always winning. And yet this fool drove those casinos into bankruptcy. Understand what that means. You have to be extraordinarily reckless to lose money in a casino business. And that's not bad luck. That's mismanagement on a grand scale. You're a straight dumbass. Then comes Trump Airlines, grounded financially. Trump Mortgage collapsed. Trump Vodka, who drank that crap? Failed. Trump Steaks, he was selling steaks. It's like, I think I said this before, he like P.T. Barnum on acid. P.T. Barnum was a great showman, but he was successful. Great con man. He knew the art of the deal. Trump Steaks. Then it's no surprise that Trump Steaks failed. You take one look at this sucker, he ain't eating his crap. And through all this, there's a consistent footnote people like to skip over. Contractors not paid, workers stiffed, small businesses left holding the bag. That's not genius. That's a business model built on shifting risk downward while protecting yourself at the top. See, real business excellence creates value, stability, and growth over time. It builds institutions that last beyond the personality. It uplifts the people involved in it. Look at some of our most well-known corporations, and we had even some of them that have eventually died out. Sears and Roebuck, Woolworths. You know, those companies went on for decades because they understood business. And they didn't get the money from their dad. Imagine getting millions of dollars from your daddy when all you really had to do was sit on the money and lose all of it. And see, what we're looking at here is something entirely different. A man who mastered brand and failure as success. Because you got a lot of suckers out there. He was actually able to turn debt into an image and convince millions that survival, no matter how messy, equals brilliance. Let's be honest about the biggest win that gets left out of the conversation. He didn't just sell buildings, he sold illusion. And you suckers bought it. From The Apprentice, the campaign rallies, the image is always the same. A decisive boss, an ultimate closer, the man who fires others before anyone can question him. And see, with television ain't a balance sheet. Catchphrases are not profit margins. And branding isn't the same thing as competence. So when people say he's a great businessman, the real question is great at what? Because if the scorecard is bankruptcies, failed ventures, unpaid workers, and constant financial rescues, then we need to redefine what great even means. This ain't about politics, it's about truth versus marketing. And the truth is simple. You can't keep calling it success when the wreckage keeps piling up. And piling up it does. Because where it got us in the theater of power, where performance replaces policy. And the press sits there and don't say a goddamn thing. Look, this all happened in one press conference. One press conference. At 12:03, Trump tells reporters he wants a ceasefire. 2 minutes later, at the same press conference, y'all, he declared victory over Iran. 2 minutes later, he announced we sending him the Marines. A minute later, he says, no boots on the ground. Damn. And the reporters are sitting there sucking this up, not questioning him at all. By 12:11, what was that? 3 minutes later, he says, we don't want a ceasefire. 5 minutes later, he declared victory again. A minute later, he says he'd like a ceasefire. By 12:30, he up there telling the lie that Iran, I gotta start pronouncing that right, because I can pronounce Italy and Iraq. Iran is begging for a ceasefire. Yeah. 5 minutes later, he said $500 oil, $500 oil. That's a good thing. All right. 2 minutes after that, he demands Iran open the Strait of Hormuz. Turns right around and says the U.S. is not at war. And by quarter of, declares victory over Iran. all in one press conference. While them sorry-ass reporters sat there and just listened. Damn. In the span of under 40 minutes, this idiot sat up there and managed to say, we want to cease fire. We don't want to cease fire. We're sending the Marines. No boots on the ground. We are not at war. We already won the war. Iran is begging. Oil at $500 a barrel is good. That's not even strategy. That's a piss poor performance. And what's allowed? What's the real strategy that the American press is allowed? And that's to control the narrative, not the reality. See, Trump doesn't need a real ceasefire. He needs the announcement of a ceasefire. He doesn't need a real victory. He needs the feeling of victory. And here's the cold truth for his base. Perception is their reality. If he stands at a podium and says, we made the greatest deal ever, Iran gave us everything, then for millions of people, that is the outcome. Regardless of what actually happened in Tehran, Washington, or the Strait of Hormuz, don't matter. For them, war is entertainment. And that's where it gets dangerous. War is being treated like a press cycle, like ratings, like a reality show finale. 1 minute, Marines are mobilizing. The next minute, no boots on the ground. The contradiction would collapse in a serious administration. But here it doesn't matter because the goal isn't coherence. The goal is constant emotional stimulation. Keep people reacting, keep them disoriented, and keep them loyal to the voice, not the facts. See, it's the invisible deal playbook. The exit strategy isn't military, it's rhetorical. He can simply declare, we won, we got oil, historical deal, and walk away. Even if no agreement exists, Iran denies everything, no policy changes on the ground. It won't matter because the headline becomes their history. And you know why it works? Because we are no longer living in a shared reality. We're in competing realities. One reality requires evidence, verification, consistency. The other requires confidence, repetition, and spectacle. And of course, the orange disaster, old Poopy George, he thrives in the second reality. See, and it's not just embarrassment or hypocrisy. It's about nuclear level consequences being filtered through improvisation. When war announcements contradict troop deployments, economic claims defy basic logic, foreign policy is reduced to slogans, you don't just get confusion, you get instability. Allies don't know what's real. Enemies don't know what's real. Even the military chain of command starts operating in ambiguity. You know how effed up that is? Right? Because this is not a leader navigating conflict. This is a man narrating himself through it, talking himself through it. And if war can be started with confusion, it could be ended with a lie. But understand this, reality doesn't negotiate with delusion. Eventually, facts collect, consequences land, and no press conference, no matter how loud, can rewrite what actually happened. I don't care how sorry the damn press has become. Can't rewrite reality. Deal with it. Just open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Before I go on, I gotta say something. I mentioned it earlier before I really got started. Some songs should not be remade. Right? And deal with that just for a second. Get back to some hard stuff here. Right? I was coming in and heard a remake of This Is a Man's World by James Brown. Yeah, a lot of nerve. A lot of nerve. I heard somebody try to remake Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On. It sucked real bad. There's some songs you just can't remake. Charlie Parker's Lover Man. Actually, Charlie Parker hated that recording. But damn, the feeling and the virtuosity, just the way he played it, because he was effed up when he played it. But damn it, you can't remake that. All right, let's get it on. Let's talk about empire, illusion, and the cost of war. Let's talk about history, because history doesn't repeat itself. It exposes patterns. It doesn't just repeat. It exposes patterns. Don't learn from history. It's bound to repeat it. Rome, then America. No, I have to go with Rome, all right? Because Rome didn't go to Persia because of necessity. Sound familiar? Rome went because of greed, ego, and political desperation. A man like Julius Caesar didn't just wage war. He used war to solve personal financial problems and consolidate power. And then what happened? Another elite, Marcus Licinius Crassus. He looked at that success and said, I want my piece too. Yeah. So he marched into Persia. Not understanding the terrain, not understanding the enemy, not understanding the consequences. Sound familiar? This is what you get with the illusion of superiority. Because Rome believed it was unbeatable. Disciplined legion, superior organization, military dominance. But what did they run into? They ran into a different style of warfare, a different technological advantage, a different strategic mindset. Persia didn't fight Rome head on. They outmaneuvered them. They exhausted them. They broke their formations and then destroyed them. And Rome, caught off guard, arrogant, unprepared, that's exactly the danger in any modern conflict with Iran. Iran is not Iraq. Let's be clear. Iran is not some weak, isolated target. Iran has advanced missile systems, regional alliances, and proxy networks. Deep knowledge of systemic warfare, asymmetric warfare, and terrain that favors defense, not invasion. This isn't a quick victory scenario. This is a long war track. Just like Rome thought. 40,000 versus 8,000, easy win. And then got annihilated. Asymmetric warfare, then and now. The Persians used horse archers, hit and run tactics, mobility over brute strength, psychological warfare. Today, Iran uses drones, cyber warfare, proxy militias, naval disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Different tools, same strategy. Wear the empire down, stretch it thin, and make it bleed slowly. and cost of arrogance. Crassus didn't just lose a battle. He lost his army, his son, his life, and his dignity. And according to historic accounts, you know what they did with that greedy bastard? They poured molten gold down his throat. You came for wealth, choke on it. That's not brutality, that's symbolism. Empires that go to war for profit and ego don't just lose militarily, they lose morally, politically, and historically. The real parallel, the real comparison isn't just Rome versus Persia. Leaders using war to distract from internal failure. Elites gambling with lies for power and legacy. Nations believing their own propaganda about invincibility. And the people, they pay the price. That's why you get leaders like the Orange Disaster so comfortable getting up there and saying, well, when we put boots on the ground, there are going to be some losses. And when these bodies come back, he don't see it with empathy. He don't see it as a tragedy of war. He sees it as a political opportunity, a propaganda opportunity. Won't even speak to the gold family, the gold member families. Take pictures, take a photo shoot with flag draped coffins and send it out to his base to ask him for more money, and them fools send it. See, history is not a museum, it's a mirror. Rome thought it was too powerful to fail, too advanced to be challenged, too dominant to be humble. Persia taught them otherwise. So before anyone beats the drums of war with Iran, understand this. You're not stepping into a battlefield. You're stepping into a lesson that's already been taught. The only question is Rome arrogant enough to fail again? Because Persia is Iran. Where's Rome? This is Dope and I'm Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Advocacy Education Station. What happened to the American dream? The American myth? You know, it's something that it was from, I would say, 1948 to 1980. The middle class was built up. America was on its way to balance. I mentioned balance because balance is the reason that the Egyptian or the Kemetic Empire lasted 3,000 years. What happened to the American dream? What happened to the middle class, which is really the backbone of any successful nation? Let me tell you, it didn't collapse overnight. It was dismantled, piece by piece, policy by policy, decade by decade. The world could be like, a really great place to live. Plenty of resources. The problem is these resources are controlled by a bunch of psychopaths. As I said, from 48 to 1980, America's greatest economic period. And it started in 1980, what they call trickle-down economics. Pushed on the country by Ronald Reagan, made roast in hell, made the devil sodomize him with a pitchfork. Under that bastard, they told the American people, give tax cuts to the rich and corporations, and the wealth will trickle down to everybody else. It didn't. What it did was concentrate wealth at the top and starve the middle. Then came the legalization of stock buybacks. Corporations were now allowed to spend profits inflating their own share prices instead of raising wages. Productivity went up, but workers' pay didn't. The gains went to shareholders and executives, not people doing the actual work. Next came the era of leveraged buyouts, the birth of modern private equity. Companies weren't built anymore. They were stripped. Bought, loaded with debt, gutted for profit, and discarded. Jobs disappeared, communities collapsed, wealth extracted. Then corporations quietly shifted from pensions to 401ks. They moved the responsibility for retirement off their books and onto individuals, people who were never taught investing, never taught compound interest, never taught how the system actually works. The pensions were stolen. At the same time, they shipped jobs overseas. American labor built the middle class here until corporations decided it was cheaper to build it somewhere else. And then came the addiction to debt. National and personal. A system built on borrowing devalues its own future. And in 2008, the house of cards collapsed under the weight of predatory lending and financial greed. Millions lost their homes. Millions. But the banks, they got bailed out with taxpayer money. And you can't just put that on the GOP, because who was president in 2008? Barack Obama, the Democrat. See, that's what we got mixed up. We thought Obama was going to be the second coming of FDR, only without the racism. And you know what? When them homes that millions of people lost became cheap, the wealthy bought them up. And that's when housing stopped being shelter and became an investment weapon. That's how you get tent cities all over the country, including right here in Wilmington. Oh yeah, I'm gonna bust you up, Wilmington. Mayor Carney. Talking about raising more money for more tent cities instead of investing in affordable housing. And you wonder why we had this violence going on. Damn. Are you that dumb? Poverty breeds violence. Then in 2010, after the Citizens United versus FCC decision, we entered a new era. Money is speech and billionaires as lawmakers. Super PACs flooded the system. Elections became auctions. Division became the strategy. Same old game, really. Divide and conquer. Then came 2020 and the pandemic. Both sides of the aisle fumbled it. Small businesses were crushed. Main Street was shut down while Wall Street was propped up. Trillions were injected into the economy. But where did it go? It went up. It always goes up. You look at other countries during the pandemic. America gave their citizens about $2,000 over the whole course of the pandemic. Yeah, countries like Norway getting their people their salary, or what is it, 85% of their salary every week. And that was just one of the countries. And the people spent a little bit of money that they got here in the U.S. because they had to survive. And that money cycled right back to the top. The wealthy didn't just recover, they expanded their dominance. And then came near zero interest rates, 2.5 to 3%. Sounds like relief, right? No. It was a green light for the wealthy to borrow cheap money and buy up everything, especially housing. Entire neighborhoods had turned into portfolios. Ownership slipped out of the reach of everyday Americans. And since then, inflation has surged, costs are up, wages are stagnant. And the middle class is hanging by a thread, if it exists at all. See, the American dream didn't die of natural causes. It was engineered out of existence. Not by accident, not by miscalculation, by design. Yeah. A system that prioritizes profit over people will always cannibalize its own foundation. In the middle class, that foundation has been systematically eroded. They told you to work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be rewarded. But the rules were rewritten while you was at work. What middle class? What American dream? This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. Let's go to school. 1994. That's when the Gun-Free Schools Act gets passed under the banner of safety. The Gun-Free Schools Act. Sounds reasonable, sounds protective. Sounds like something any parent would support. But that law didn't land evenly. It never does. It landed on black children like a hammer. Because in America, policy is one thing, but enforcement is where racism lives. White kids brought contraband, they got detention, maybe a call home. Black kids did the same, they got handcuffed, booked, and introduced to the criminal justice system before they even learned long division. Let's say it plain. This was the expansion of the school to prison pipeline, not as an accident, but as an evolution. Schools stopped being places of development. They became pre-incarceration centers. Teachers weren't just educators anymore. They were informants. Principals weren't administrators. They became prosecutors. And police officers, they weren't protecting schools. They were embedded inside them, waiting. And waiting for what? For childhood to behave like childhood? A 6-year-old throws a tantrum because that's what children do. But what if that child is black? That tantrum becomes disorderly conduct. And that child becomes a case number. Meanwhile, a white child having the exact same outburst gets a counselor, a behavior plan, and patience. That's not a difference in behavior. That's a difference in perception. And in perception in America has always been racialized. And by the time folks start wringing their hands and pretending to be shocked, over 3 million black children have already been funneled out of classrooms into cages. 3 million futures interrupted, 3 million minds redirected, 3 million lives stamped with a record before adulthood even began. And they called it school safety. No. Call it what it is. Educational genocide. Now, here's where history comes back to slap us in the face. Because long before 1994, there were warnings. Even from the very figures people love to sanitize and misquote today. That should make it obvious who I'm about to talk about. Martin Luther King Jr. understood something that folks don't want to talk about. He supported integration, but he also drew a line. And he made it clear, you cannot place black children in the hands of people who hate them and expect education to happen. Don't be surprised if you expect Romans to educate your children and they come back effed up legionnaires, gladiators. Because education is not just a curriculum. It's care, perception, expectation, and belief. And if a teacher sees a child as a threat instead of a mind to be developed, that classroom becomes a battlefield. See, Dr. King warned that integration without transformation, without confronting racism, would damage black children, and that's exactly what happened. Every time I talk about this, I tell you what my mama said, what my mother said. And that's the part they really don't want discussed. My mother said, desegregate the resources. Because before integration, black educators were doing something miraculous. They were producing excellence with hand-me-down books and broken facilities and secondhand everything. But they had something that cannot be legislated: investment in black children as human beings. They saw potential, not pathology. They saw brilliance, not threat. They saw children, not suspects. So the issue was never that black schools lacked capability. They lacked resources. Mom said it right. We should have desegregated resources, not handed our children over to systems and people who never believed in them. Because what did integration actually become? Not shared power, not equal footing. It became assimilation into hostile environments. Black teachers lost their jobs. Black principals were pushed out. Black educational culture was dismantled. And black children, They were placed under the control of people who viewed them through the same lens as law enforcement, pre-criminal. So when the 1994 policies hit, the ground was already all that law did was formalize with the mindset already believed that black children are problems to be managed, not minds to be nurtured. And now, here we are, still debating discipline disparities, still acting confused about outcomes, still pretending this wasn't intentional. And let me say this clearly. You do not get racially predictable outcomes by accident. You get them by design. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. This wasn't about discipline. This was about containment. And it wasn't about education. This was about diversion from classrooms to cages. And until we confront that truth, not dress it up, not dilute it, not both sides it, we will keep sending generation after generation of black children into institutions that see them not as students, but as suspects in waiting. That's the reality. And reality doesn't change until we name it. And once you name it, you can't unsee it. WHGE 95.3 FM, The Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. You know, having been raised a revolutionary, I do not like to get in a position where I have to be reactionary. I don't move through this world looking to react. I move with intention. I'd rather stand on principle than be dragged in a constant response. And don't confuse my restraint with weakness. Because I don't subscribe to the ideal that harm should be absorbed, dismissed, or spiritualized away. People love to quote, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." And that sounds noble. The hell with that. You kill my cat, I'm going to shoot your horse, kill both your dogs, turn over your fish tank, and feed your kid's hamster to my new cat. You get it? See, what I believe in is accountability. You cross a line with me, there will be a response. Not chaos, consequence. Not blind rage, because I think things through. There would be precision. Because too many people had grown comfortable thinking they can test boundaries and walk away untouched. It's a video series going around called "Leave Black People Alone." Where people don't adhere to that, they face consequences. And let me be clear about something for those who say it's not that serious. You don't have to respond to everything. Just let it go. No. Oh, hell no. That mindset is exactly why disrespect becomes normalized. That's how small infractions grow into patterns. That's how people learn they can get away with it. I don't let the small stuff slide, because there's no such thing as small when it comes to be repeated disrespect, especially racial disrespect. Every joke, every slick comment, every sideways remark, it all comes from somewhere, and I address it every goddamn time. Not because I'm emotional, but because I'm intentional. You call it oversensitive, I call it aware. You call it overreacting, I call it setting a boundary. And once that boundary is set, it does not move. Understand this clearly. Disrespect from the same people doesn't happen twice. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because I make it clear the first time that it will not be tolerated again. And I'm not here to be comfortable for anyone. I'm here to be clear. You cross the line once, you'll be corrected. Try it again, you already know what comes next. You teach people how to treat you. And that's what we as a community have to do. We keep going through the same mess. The police brutality, the disrespect. It starts with the microaggressions. Thousands unemployed because we got a racist administration putting people in policy position that can't even define DEI. The injustice continues and continues, and this will continue until black people draw a line in the sand. If Black Lives Matter, there must be consequences for those that believe otherwise. Not a line of empty slogans, not a line made up of hashtags, a line backed by strategy, unity, and consequences that reshape power, not just vent anger. Because history has shown us something uncomfortable but undeniable. Platitudes don't disrupt systems. Marches without demands don't force change. Prayers without pressure don't move institutions. Symbolic gestures, knees, hands up, statements can be acknowledged, absorbed, and ignored. And they often are. Power does not respond to emotion. Power responds to pressure. If black lives are truly to matter, not as a phrase, but as a lived reality, then the question becomes, what are the consequences for systems, institutions, and individuals that act like they don't? Not chaos, not random retaliation. That's exactly what gets used to discredit the cause and justify repression. Real consequences look different. Economic pressure, sustained boycotts, targeted divestment, controlling where dollars go and don't go. Political consequences. Voting blocks that punish inaction, not just reward promises. Institutional accountability. Lawsuits, policy demands, and removal of officials who fail the community, Carney. Narrative control, refusing to let others define the story, the terms, or the tone of injustice. We must control the narrative. And collective discipline. Unity strong enough that lines once drawn are not easily crossed or ignored. Because the truth is this, nothing changes until ignoring black people becomes more costly than respecting black people. That's the real line in the sand. And history backs this up. Every major gain came not from being heard, but from being impossible to ignore without consequence. So the question isn't whether a line needs to be drawn. It's whether that line will be organized, strategic, and sustained enough to actually hold. Because history teaches one thing over and over again. Nothing changes until it becomes more expensive to maintain injustice than it is to end it. And that's the line. And until it is drawn and held, this will continue. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. All right. Okay. Listen, coming around to the close here. And there it is. Not the version they package for you. Not the version they sanitize for public consumption, but the truth. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable. See, once you understand the game, you stop playing it the same way. You stop blaming yourself for a system designed to exploit you. You stop chasing approval from structures built to exclude you. And most importantly, you stop being surprised by outcomes that were engineered from the beginning. Awareness is a dangerous thing because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once enough people see it, that's when the system starts to shake. So don't just hear this message, carry it. Question more, accept less, and never let anyone convince you that what you're seeing isn't real, because it is. I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, what I learned is this. A line in the sand don't mean a damn thing if you're not willing to defend it. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority. Treat you as an option. This has been Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. Thanks for joining me. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right. Yes, Dean. Draw that line in the sand, like Ibrahim Touré. Global African supremacy, because the world was a much better place when it was ruled by the black man instead of these psychopath thugs from Europe. Peace and love. I'm Patrice Gibbs. My little time closing out here. All right. There you go.